Welcome to Scripture of the Day. Today we're here at the Long Beach Airport because we have one of the greatest departures of all time. And we have the arrival of a prophet for a whole new generation. Hey, my name's Bobby Blakey, and I'm here to invite you to read the Bible. And today we're starting 2 Kings. The book of 2 Kings begins with a second king. His name is Ahaziah, son of Ahab, and he continues in the evil ways of his father who has died. And now Ahaziah thinks he's going to die. So he sends out messengers to inquire, but they don't go to inquire of Yahweh. They go to inquire of the idol Baal. But all of a sudden the messengers come back so fast. And he's like, hey, why didn't you guys go and deliver your message? And they're like, oh, well, we got a new message along the way. And the message is there not a God in Israel you can inquire of? And you can see the king, he starts thinking right away here at the beginning of 2 Kings. And he's like, wait a minute, who gave you this message? And they're like, oh, well, he had a clothing of camel's hair and he had a leather belt around his waist. And the king's like, it's Elijah the Tishbite. And every time the king says that, I always think there should be an Elijah the Tishbite theme song.
Why are you looking at me? Is that why I'm here?
Come on, kids! Get up on your feet and put your hands together!
Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home.
And that's why we're here at the Long Beach Airport, because we have one of the most epic departures of all time. The prophet Elijah is going to be taken up to heaven in a whirlwind. But not only do we have a departure, we have the arrival of the next generation of prophet. And so this concludes the second act of Elijah. Do you remember when Elijah was ready to die after he won the prophet throwdown on Mount Carmel, and he prayed for rain and he ran ahead of Ahab's chariot? He was like, take my life, Lord, when he found out Jezebel wanted to kill him. Well, God had more for Elijah to do. And we read how God told Elijah, this was back in 1 Kings 19, he said, no, you're going to anoint kings, and you're even going to anoint another prophet, Elisha. And so that's the story of 2 Kings 2, that Elijah and Elisha are going on together, and this is the baton passing. This is the handing off of being the prophet of Israel from one generation to the next. And see, this is so important. I'm so glad you're watching this video. I hope you're reading Kings with us, because this is an example of discipleship among the prophets of Israel. The point of Elijah's story wasn't just what Elijah would do. And Elijah, he does awesome things. But the point is also what he would pass on. So even when Elijah is gone, his work would continue. Now, I hope you know how important a character Elijah is in the scripture. Elijah, he never wrote a book of the Bible. No, he only shows up here in 1st and 2nd Kings, but he is talked about throughout the scripture. In fact, Elijah, there's a prophecy that Elijah is yet to come that Jesus says is fulfilled in John the Baptist. So Elijah is like a prototype for John the Baptist, the voice in the wilderness, preparing the way of the Lord. In fact, Malachi chapter 4, verse 5 gives the prophecy of Elijah coming. And in Matthew 11:14, or even when the angel talks to Zechariah in Luke 1, they make it clear, John the Baptist, he's the fulfillment of the prophet Elijah. So Elijah is so important that when Jesus is transfigured before Peter, James, and John, in Matthew 17 on the Mount of Transfiguration, when he appears before them, who shows up with Jesus in all of his glory? It's Moses and Elijah. So do you see Elijah on the level of Moses? Do you even know that when Jesus is crying out on the cross, the people there say he's crying out for Elijah maybe Elijah's going to come back and save Jesus from dying on the cross. So Elijah, in the minds of the Jewish people, is at the status of GOAT. He is at the status of legend. And because he's a guy who didn't die, he just rode off into heaven. And so his epic departure here in 2 Kings 2 puts Elijah in a category like beyond in people's minds. And so they have so much respect for who Elijah is. And so this is the last story of Elijah in 2 Kings 2. And it's like everybody knows it if you've read today's chapter. And I hope you're reading the Bible. In fact, you might want to open up to 2 Kings 2 and get your eyeballs on the Bible, not just watching me here on YouTube. But 2 Kings 2, it has a geographical chiasm, everybody. Yes, that's right. We're bringing out some mappery, and I want you to pay attention to the places that we're going to go in today's chapter, because we're starting in Bethel, we're going to Jericho, we're going down to the Jordan, and then guess what? We go back from the Jordan to Jericho and then to Bethel. So this is a chiasm. And a chiasm, you kind of step down to the centerpiece, the main thing, and then you kind of step back out from the center. So the main point of the story, the centerpiece of the story, is what happens at the Jordan River. But it doesn't end there. We go back to Jericho and back to Bethel. So you got to really read the whole chapter to get the whole story here, because really this is a story of prophetic discipleship, where the baton is being passed from Elijah to Elisha. And it's even interesting how their names are so similar. It's almost like we're supposed to see it as one story with two different men. And everybody seems to know, if you've read through 2 Kings 2, everybody knows this is Elijah's last day. Like Elijah's taken off, and they say it in Bethel, they say it in Jericho on their way to the Jordan, and it's like, hey, Elisha, do you know your guy, your leader? You know he's leaving today? And Elisha's like, yeah, I know, don't talk about it. So there's this hush-hush secret operation where Elijah is about to depart. And that's what's going to happen. Now, there's just some details here you could easily gloss over, but I would love to help draw them to your attention. My goal was to pay closer attention to 2 Kings 2 than I ever had before. And you notice how Elijah parts the Jordan River. And we're not just tossing around miracles for free, okay? When something miraculous happens, God's got a purpose. And the parting of the Jordan River shows that through the prophet Elijah, Yahweh is still with his people, right? When they parted the Jordan River with Joshua to go into the promised land, that was Yahweh saying, I'm with you, I'm leading you into the promised land. Just like I led you through the Red Sea with Moses, I'm leading you through the Jordan into the promised land with Joshua. Well, guess what? Yahweh is still with his people at the time of Elijah, the most evil time in the history of Israel. And guess what? God's still there. In fact, in the most evil time came the most famous prophet of all Israel, Elijah. Very important for us to see in our evil day, God reigns over the evil, God reigns over the kings, and God can still use his people to do glorious things even in an evil time. And so that's the significance of the parting of the Jordan River. Yahweh's still here among his people. Okay? Now, Elisha, he makes an interesting request right before Elijah's about to go. He says, can I have a double portion of your spirit? Basically, Elisha has his own double-double project, ladies and gentlemen. He wants to, can you imagine? Elijah is just such an intense character. And then you want to be double Elijah? That's a big ask. That's a bold request. And where is that coming from? Here's a cross-reference for you. Deuteronomy 21:17 will talk about the firstborn getting a double portion of the inheritance. And so you gotta, when some things sometimes seem a little interesting, why would you say double portion? That just seems like it comes out of nowhere. Usually it doesn't come out of nowhere. Usually it comes out of the law of Moses. That's where most things come from, everybody. So Deuteronomy 21:17 will give you an idea of why Elisha asked for a double portion. And Elijah's like, well, if you see me, then you'll get that double portion. And so then we got chariots of fire and horses of fire that show up. And I want you to really pay close attention, because I noticed that it actually says these chariots and horses of fire, they come between Elijah and Elisha. They separate one generation of prophet from the other. And then it says that a whirlwind is what takes Elijah up into heaven. So I always thought, swing low, sweet chariot, like maybe you've heard the song recently perhaps, and it's like the chariot takes Elisha up. If you pay attention, the whirlwind takes him up, and the chariot and the horses of fire just separate him. So it's like there's this fire all around him, and then the whirlwind takes him up to heaven. Talk about something amazing, all right? To be taken up to heaven without dying, okay? That is awesome. That is a more glorious departure than has ever occurred at the Long Beach airport, and I think airplane flight is impressive, not compared to being taken up by a whirlwind into heaven without dying. So that puts Elijah in this elite category of legend because the guy didn't die. And I've always thought how awesome it would be to be raptured, right? So I do want to just bring up the hope that I have. I would hope to be raptured rather than to die. I don't know if anybody else believes that, but according to 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 17, I believe that there will be a generation of people who will be caught up to meet Jesus in the clouds, and so we will always be with the Lord. And if you know my story of how I got engaged to my wife, Krista, we actually were on a Southwest flight. I saw a lot of Southwest flights taking off here from Long Beach today. We were on a Southwest flight where we had visited my family in Texas. We were coming back out here to California, and I was able to ask her to marry me up in the clouds. And so that's a great memory that I have of getting engaged up 33,000 feet cruising altitude. That's where I knew she would be my bride. And wouldn't it be awesome if someday soon, you and I were caught up to meet the Lord in the clouds, and so we will always be with the Lord. Hey, I just want to encourage you with those words from 1 Thessalonians 4, 17 to 18. I hope someday I can go up to Elijah and say, wow, that must have been awesome, Elijah. Kind of like when I got raptured. That's what I hope. I would love to be one of the people that get raptured by Jesus. But see, that's not the end of the story. As epic as that is, Elijah, a guy that we read, said, I'm ready to die, take me. You know, God has a whole second act for him in his life, and Elijah ends up being a guy who doesn't die, but goes straight to be with God in heaven. As awesome as that is, the story continues, because Elisha, he apparently does see Elijah, and he gets a double portion of Elijah's spirit. And so guess what Elisha is now able to do? And there's a group of men there who watch this. There's witnesses who see this, where Elisha now can part the Jordan River. So here's the point of 2 Kings 2. Elijah is gone, but Yahweh is still here. That's the point. Yeah, we might have a different, it might be, instead of Jah, it's now Shah. But Yahweh, he's still there among his people. New generation, new face, same name of Yahweh. See, that's the whole point. This is the whole point of discipleship. Some of you might be feeling, as you watch this video, like your best days of living are behind you. Well, guess what? There's a second act. There's a purpose. The purpose of life is not just for you to live it yourself. The purpose of life is to pass it on to others who can live it while you're gone. That's a big purpose. And Elisha, this transfer of being a prophet from Elijah to Elisha, it's supposed to inspire us. Wait, Elijah had come to the end, but no, he lives on through Elisha. Now there's two fascinating things that happen, because Elisha, he goes back to Jericho and he goes back to Bethel. So even though the climax of our chiasm has already happened, there's more to the story. You got to read the whole thing. You got to pay attention to the end. Remember, even when Elijah said to Elisha, maybe you should stay here in Bethel, or maybe you should stay here in Jericho, both cities, he said that. It's almost like there was something for Elisha to do in those cities. And when Elisha gets to Jericho, and remember, Jericho was a cursed city. Do you remember that? From Joshua 6:26, when the walls fell down and they devoted Jericho to destruction. Remember how Joshua said in Joshua 6:26, that whoever rebuilds this city, there would be a curse upon them. It would cost them the life of their firstborn at this part, the life of another. And then that actually was fulfilled in 1 Kings 16:34 when they rebuilt Jericho. Exactly like Joshua said, that's what happened because the word of the Lord has ultimate authority. That's the theme of Kings, right? And so Jericho is a cursed place. And they're like, hey, they tell Elisha, it's actually pleasant to live here. It's actually going well. There's just something wrong with the water. In fact, it seems like the water is leading people to having miscarriages. Miscarriages are a heartbreaking trial if you've ever been through one or you know someone who has. That's such a brutal experience to have the hope of life and then to experience death. And so Elisha, he does this amazing thing here where apparently with some salt in the water, with some kind of miracle here, he heals the water and now there's no more death and miscarriages through the water of Jericho. And Jericho is going to go on to become a city well known at the time of Jesus, even well known to this very day. Last time I was in Israel, I had lunch in Jericho. It was delicious. We celebrated some birthdays in there. They had fireworks on the cake. It was awesome. So, Jericho becomes a place maybe because of what Elisha really does here, that heals the water. But then there's another story here where we go and out of Bethel come these young lads, these boys. And these boys come out of Bethel and they're mocking Elisha as he goes by. And maybe you've heard of this story before, or if this was the first time you read this story, maybe it shocked you, where these she-bears, these mama bears come out and they tear apart 42 of these lads, these boys, who are mocking Elisha. Now, I want to stand up for the prophets, because the prophets, they get some blame these days. Like in chapter 1, fire is falling from heaven. Did you read 2 Kings 1, where when they come to get Elisha the Tishbite after the theme song, after they realize it's Elijah, fire, he says, if I'm a man of God, let fire fall from heaven, and it consumes up 50 soldiers, and then it consumes up another 50 soldiers, and then the third out of the groups of 50 soldiers come, and they're like, oh, please spare us, Elijah, please consider our lives precious. And then what does the Lord say to Elijah? You can go with them, do not be what? Afraid. A lot of people are like, why is Elijah calling for fire from heaven to consume these guys? Elijah's not very nice. He's kind of harsh. Well, hold up, everybody. Before we start blaming the prophets for people dying, the prophets are just messengers. They just speak for God. God is judging his people because they have turned away to idolatry and are doing what is evil in his sight. These guys aren't coming to have a friendly conversation with Elijah. They're coming to kill Elijah. And the fire coming from heaven is supposed to remind everybody that God already used Elijah to prove once and for all that Baal is not God, Yahweh is God. That was the point that was proven in 1 Kings 18, that they are still living in disobedience to. And so this is a reminder that they should have turned to Yahweh a long time ago. That's why the fire is consuming them from heaven. It's because of their sin against God. And see, even when the king sends those messengers to inquire of Baal, that's not right. According to Deuteronomy chapter 13, let me give you this. Deuteronomy 12:30. Deuteronomy 12:30, you can look it up. You don't inquire of the other gods. You only inquire of Yahweh. So they're breaking the law of Moses. And then they want to kill Elijah for their sin? No, these 50 guys are coming to kill Elijah. So when fire falls from heaven, it's just God protecting his prophet and God reminding his people that Yahweh is God. Now, when these bears come out and they get these 42 lads, you might want to look up Leviticus 26:22, because one of the things God says he's going to do if you don't obey his law and you turn away from him to idols, if you don't keep the law, there will be curses. If you sin against God, there will be judgment. And one of the ways that God is going to judge is the wild beasts are not going to be restrained and they're going to come in. And so when everybody hears, hey, headline, Bethel, headline, is that the boys got mauled by these wild bears. That should remind them of the law of Moses. Yeah, when you turn away from God, one of the ways that you're going to be cursed, one of the ways your sin is going to have consequences is the wild beasts are going to come in and they're going to get your kids. That's what it says. Go back and read it in Leviticus 26:22. This is an example of it. So if you reread the story of these boys coming to mock Elijah, it's not like they're just making fun like kids on the playground of somebody who's bald. No, these guys, these kids coming from Bethel are going out of their way to mock a prophet of Yahweh who's passing by on the road. And so this is really not just about making fun of someone's physical appearance, but it's about being against Yahweh and taking it out on his prophet. And they're being judged for the rejection of Yahweh. Even the sin of the parents who are rejecting Yahweh in Bethel, which is the hub of their sacrifices in their false system that they've created in the northern kingdom of Israel. The parents have taught a wrong way to their children. And now the children are even suffering because of the sins of the parents. And so this is a judgment on sin. So don't blame the prophets for the sin of the people. Don't blame the messenger for God's judgment. And so that, I want to make sure that we don't think wrongly, like, oh, why are the prophets doing this? No, the question is, why do the people continue to do evil in the sight of the Lord when God's sending his prophets to show them that Yahweh is God? And so it goes from Elijah doing that to Elisha doing that. And so I hope this is exciting to you, that we're reading through how God worked in an evil day. And even when evil was at its peak in Israel through Ahab and his son, Ahaziah, God did this beautiful thing where he raised up a prophet who brought his name to his people. And then he used that prophet to pass it on to the next generation who would continue to spread his name. And we're living in an evil day. And we're living in a time where a lot of people think, is this going to be the end of America? Are we reaching peak evil in the history of our country? And I'm hoping that even in this evil time, God will raise us up and God will do something through us. Maybe in Huntington Beach, maybe here in Long Beach, that God will do more than all we could ask or think. And not even just with us, but there will be a whole second act where we will disciple people so that even when we're gone, the message could continue on. Now, I hope we all get raptured. I would love to have the epic departure, but if we don't have the epic departure, then I'm rooting for the arrival of a whole new generation of Christians, right? Your life is not just about what you're going to do, but who you're going to pass it on to. And if Jesus has saved you and you're walking in the way of Jesus Christ, you're denying yourself, you're taking up your cross, you're following Jesus, it's not an individual sport. It's not a solo mission. On the day that you go to heaven, I hope there's somebody who can pick up right where you left off. That's our goal. We are on a mission from God to make disciples of Jesus Christ. And that's what we see here in 2 Kings 2. In fact, one of my favorite verses is the 2:2:2 verse, right? We like to talk about this at our church with all of our elders and our deacons. 2:2:2, 2 Timothy 2:2, where Paul is saying to his disciple Timothy, hey, Timothy, take what you learned from me and teach it to faithful men who will what? Be able to teach others also, right? So Timothy, he's going to teach it to faithful men, to multiple other people, and then those people are going to pass it on. That's 2 Timothy 2:2. And now we see an example of that, hey, in the Hebrew Bible, 2 Kings 2, another 2:2, where you can see it goes from one generation to the next. And that's how Christianity has come down for 2,000 years, from Jesus to us. And we want to leave a legacy for those who follow us. So I hope you're encouraged today by the awesome things that God did through Elijah the Tishbite, a man worthy of his own theme song.
Swing low, sweet chariot.